Hello everyone, I'm Oleszczuk, a PhD candidate researching queerness in comics. In my presentation, I both extend and narrow my focus a bit and cover the ways in which American comics go against multi-layered discrimination. I also present a case study examining the intersectionality of race, gender, class, sexuality, and physical appearance in an academically neglected comic series, Elfquest. So let's start with some background knowledge about comics. It is hardly surprising that comics as a medium using narratives to tell stories, as well as a product of culture that always exists within its socio-political context, are shaped by the social norms surrounding the organization of knowledge and power relations of gender, class, and race, among many others. Similar to other media, for the majority of the last century, American comics relied on the perpetuation of unrealistic and stereotypical portrayals of race and gender, underrepresentation of women and minorities, and distorted representations of cultural and social lives. With the emergence of comic books in the 1930s that allowed for more widespread publication of original stories, as well as the further development and codification of specific styles, the creative content of comics became somewhat limited by the formulaic nature of genres, especially the ones in which characters pursuing all kinds of justice had to, and I'm quoting Phillips and Strobel here, operate in the context of the male, white, heterosexual realm, with women primarily portrayed as young, sexual objects in need of protection, end of quote. In fact, one could say that notions of race, gender, and other categories of difference, the transformative histories, mutually complicated relationships, and theoretical discourses on them run parallel to the evolution of comics. Since the origins of the medium, these issues have been implicated in it on a number of levels, as they have been defining and determining who was considered valued and valuable, gendered and racialized in terms of authorship, readers, and characters. Consequently, comics started off as a medium privileging white, straight men, rife with images of hegemonic masculinity, implicitly or even explicitly reaffirming the natural dissimilarities of males and females. This can be illustrated by a number of examples from well-known early American comics. So Prince Valiant travels the world, fighting numerous enemies while women around him die, get kidnapped, or are used to further the storyline by getting married or giving birth. Superman keeps saving Lois Lane, who in her vanity rejects his alter ego Clark Kent because he lacks traditional masculine features she associates with desirability. DC Comics' Captain Marvel falls in love with beauteous Ivana, a tall blonde who is so beautiful that Captain Nazi considers her the perfect Aryan. You can see these three characters here, Prince Valiant on the left, Superman and Lois Lane in the middle, and Sivan on the right. All of them, not surprisingly, unfortunately, are white. One could argue that such portrayals of women, people of color, and occasionally queer people as secondary characters are largely dependent on the historical context of the creation. However, the practice of underrepresenting and or misrepresenting people who do not fall into the category of white heteronormative men, understood as Wood points out, as hard, tough, independent, sexually aggressive, unafraid, violent, totally in control of all emotions, and above all, in no way feminine, end of quote, has continued throughout the 20th century and well into the 21st century. American comic books are often classified based on their chronological status as belonging to one of the four major ages: Golden Age from 38 to 56, Silver Age 56 to 70, Bronze Age 70 to 85, and Dark or Modern Age 85 to present day. The Dark Age of comic books, as you can see, is considered to continue through the present day. So the rise of independent publishers and a drastic increase in the popularity of artistic stories based on contemporary reality tackling difficult social issues. This led to the expansion and diversification of the market. While the beginnings of this period were plagued by the hypersexualizations of both feminine and masculine traits, this trend recently seems to be on decline, with gender and racial stereotypes often undergoing explicit or implicit deconstruction in the comic books of the 21st century. Furthermore, the connection between gender, race, and other categories of difference is getting progressively more visible in the stories published in the mainstream, alternative, and independent comic books, regardless of the genre. The last decade of the previous century was when the American comics world finally started to engage more openly in the discussions of privilege and power. Curiously, this is also when we saw the increase in the number of creators who are non-male, non-white, and non-straight, and at the same time operate within the mainstream genres and choose to challenge the patterns of hegemonic white male domination and go beyond the traditional view of social roles. Furthermore, modern technologies enabled the development of webcomics that can and often are used by the disempowered groups to facilitate representation and ensure inclusivity. Emerging on the intersection of participatory and convergent cultures and utilizing the potential of the internet for deconstructing many of traditional boundaries and creating web collectives for the underrepresented groups, webcomics provide a space for the marginalized fans and creators and often become what Scott calls weapons of intervention in the gender and comics debate. The case study that follows is a bit older than the internet and focuses on retracing the challenge to the patterns of hegemonic white male domination and explores the ways in which comic books go beyond the traditional view of social roles. And the case study is Elfquest. Elfquest, it was imagined by Wendy Pini and created by her and her husband Richard, and it occupies a significant place in the history of alternative comic books. Launched in '78, the series have been published by the authors for 40 years through a number of independent and mainstream companies, and ended with the last issue released by Dark Horse Comics in 2018, even though now it has been relaunched and there is a new season of Elfquest being published. Its narrative is centered around a group of elves and their wolf pack who are forced into migration by humans and trolls and embark on a quest, in the course of which they discover that they are descendants of alien colonists and have to learn to navigate their newfound identity in an increasingly multiracial and multicultural world. The Pini series is carefully planned, and the details and scope of the world building, as well as the ability to flawlessly incorporate subtle shifts in storylines in response to the constant changes in the socio-political space and time of its production, have cultural analytical value in themselves. Still, fortunately, Elfquest is equally, if not more remarkable for its interrogation of the interplay between gendered categories of difference, including sexuality, race, and class. Yet the research potential of the series has gone largely unnoticed by comic studies. With just a handful of scholarly publications, Guillaume sees that as an extension of prejudices against female readers and creators in the male-oriented industry and world, and speculates that the prettiness of the drawings and the fact that it serves a fantasy narrative addressing young people as well as adults may seem to downplay the subversive potential of the work in the eyes of critics. Nevertheless, there is no question that even without being a highly institutionalized text, Elfquest is fully capable of questioning oppressive social norms and offering insights into the shifting nature of power structures. Set in the universe defined by multidimensional diversities, and now I'm quoting Saunders here, it sculpts a progressive future for an evolved humanity, one in which the pre-68 era extreme heteronormativity, rigid hierarchies, and crushing monoculturalism are dispatched in favor of a new world order based on sexual liberation, acceptance of divergent ideologies, and ethnic and social pluralism. The progression of the relationship between seemingly heteronormative protagonists of the series, Lita, a female healer, and Cutter, a male warrior, is a clear illustration of this thesis. While such stereotypical division of tasks is common in fantastic fiction, in Elfquest it is not predicated on gender or class background, as individual choices outweigh social conventions. Lita's profession is an expression of her prowess in controlling life and death, and she is by no means deprived of power. Furthermore, while Cutter's first attempt at winning her is originally grounded, or at least seems to be grounded, in the romanticized violence against women, a subversive vision of male and female identities follows. The warrior is revealed to lack both knowledge and ability to keep her imprisoned, and the healer is given the sole agency over her fate and is shown as enabling the development of new social relations and transgressing the accepted norms in choosing a partner of different race and caste tainted by wolf blood. On this slide, you can see Lita on the right above me and Cutter on the left. Wendy Pini's the unusual art style that hybridizes Japanese shoujo manga and anime with mainstream American visual language characterized by Kon as Kirbian, allows for the production of new combinations of degendered and, to a certain extent, ethnically ambiguous traits. Regardless of their sex or gender, Pini's characters are often portrayed in dynamic poses, aimed to establish them as objects of desire and to convey their power and androgynous beauty. While Kirbian's language of comics draws, and I'm quoting Kon here, bodies that are often physically exaggerated, men are more muscular, women are more curvy, end of quote. She constantly accentuates muscles, large eyes, and elaborate hairstyles to indicate the attractiveness of all her elves and free them from the limits circumscribed by the gender's aspects of appearance, recognizing that it is the biological gender dimorphism that constitutes, and quoting Dvorsky and Hughes here, the most basic power dynamic in society, allowing men to coerce women with their stronger bodies and dominance-driven behavior. End of quote. Nowhere is this condemnation of oppressive social norms more evident when it comes to Elfquest than in the treatment of sexuality. Sex positivity functions as an essential part of elvish identity, and throughout the series, the race goes from mostly heterosexual liberation to omnisexuality as the default label. Expressions of desire and love are coded quite fluidly, and relationships are neither institutionalized nor limited to two people or people of different genders. Furthermore, Elfquest emphasizes the significance of consent, and we're talking about a series that started 40 years ago, and freedom of choice, both in relation to sexual acts and performances of masculinities and femininities, and uses narrative to explicitly stigmatize gender stereotyping and prejudices and reveal them to be social constructs existing in particular cultures. Unlike many other comics featuring action heroines inspired by American superheroes, the series does not feature sexualized violence and purposefully deconstructs the male-female hierarchy as revealed by the creators in numerous interviews. In fact, a study of gender roles in Elfquest conducted in the 90s revealed that, quoting Russell here, female characters are actually less likely to need to be rescued than male characters are, and are about equally likely to be shown in the nude. End of quote. As for 40 years, the series has been embracing diversity and emphasizing that enlightened individual choice must prevail over prejudice and restrictive cultural codes, one can only assume that this quantitative equality did not diminish with time. So, conclusions. Ultimately, the arguments that this presentation has made are that gender and race intersected with other categories of difference are powerful constructs that have had a significant impact in comic books since the very beginnings, and that noticing their importance can offer new ways of both reading and creating comics. The discussion of Elfquest showed that public awareness of the intersectionality of social identities and representation in comic books have been evolving, at first rather slowly, but over the last decade quite rapidly. While Elfquest is a series with over 40 years of history, it is still important due to its reliance on constant and repetitive acts of crossing and redrawing the boundaries of established concepts, context, and meta-narratives, and the construction of a new visual discourse, as well as unorthodox design and narrative practices. Thank you for watching my presentation. If you have any questions or comments, visit my Q&A channel on Friday or use any of the channels of communication you can see on my final slide. I'm always happy to talk about comics, gender, race, and everything queer. Thank you for watching.